when the Jews rejected Christ, they were doing what they were supposed to do. It was God's will for the Jews to go into a long exile for their part in the crucifixion of Christ. The long exile is listed as one of the curses in Deuteronomy 28. And like Daniel 9:27 says, the covenant was confirmed against the Jews for their part in the executing, the cutting off of the Messiah, which is given in verse 26. When it says the covenant was confirmed, it means the curses of the covenant were confirmed. The covenant of Moses, the Torah. Deuteronomy 28 is a list of the curses. Now, why did God want the Jews to go into a long exile? Well, first of all, it wasn't just because they had a part in the killing of Christ. They came back from that exile, and they revolted again against the Romans in AD 132. And this is when they committed a really grievous sin, even worse than the killing of Christ. They accepted a false Messiah named Bar Kokhba, son of a star. And it was the Rabbi Akiva, a very terrible rabbi, a very antichrist, devilish rabbi. And he got the Jews to fight the war of independence under the banner of this false Messiah. Now, the Christian Jews, they rebelled against that. And this is where anti-Semitism comes. When the Jews call these Christian Jews traitors, the Christian Jews got very mad. And they had a grudge against the rest of the Jews. And this became the start of Christian anti-Semitism. And so the Jews themselves are responsible for anti-Semitism. Now, when I say that the Jews did what they were supposed to do by rejecting Christ, I'm saying that this led to them going into an exile, which was God's will, so that when they came back from the exile in 1948, the new inhabitants of the land would be sure to say, the land is no longer yours, you've been away too long. And so there would be a war to take the land back from the Jews, a war by the Muslims. And it's God's will for this war and the series of wars to take place. And when the final war takes place, it won't be just the Muslims against the Jews. It will be the Muslims plus the Russians. Plus the Russians. Not only that, the Russians will take over the world shortly before that. And so it'll be the whole world against the Jews, just like Zechariah 14, 1 through 4 says. And so, it's God's will for the Jews to reject Christ and to have a part in the killing of Christ, so they would go into this exile. And then when they come back, the new inhabitants would have a series of wars against them. And finally, the whole world would join the Palestinians in this war against the Jews. Now, why did God want that? Well, first of all, the Palestinians, the word Palestine comes from the word Philistia, which comes from the word Philistine. And basically, the Palestinians are modern-day Philistines. Now, they have a part in this war against the Jews, even though it's a very small part, because it's the rest of the Arabs, and like I say, the Russians, and then the world under the Russians. But let's focus on the Palestinians. This war will be the Palestinians against the Jews, so it'll be like David and Goliath. Instead of David against the Palestinians, it'll be the son of David against the sons of Goliath, so to speak. And Goliath was a giant, and the Russians are the modern day equivalent of Goliath in the sense that they are superpower. They are a giant. And so it'll be like David and Goliath in the form of Christ versus the Russians. And just like David did not have any armor, he did not have a sword, he did not have a shield. He had nothing except a slingshot. Well, what will Christ have? All he will do is give off light. It will be Acts 9, verse 3, all over again. Saul was doing what the Russians will be doing. See, the Russians will invade Israel. They'll be waging war against the Jews. Well, Saul of Tarsus was waging war against a subset of the Jews that believed in Christ, believed in Jesus. And when Christ appeared to him, his response, that's the same response the Russians will have. They will switch sides. They will go over to Christ's side. They will be like Saul of Tarsus, becoming Paul. And these Russians, the ones that revolt against the loyalists, see, there'll be mutiny against the loyalists. And that's in Ezekiel 38, 21 and Zechariah 14, 13. And they'll fight each other. The Russians will fight each other, and the good Russians will be the ones that go over to Christ's side. He sends them back home to Russia to proclaim his glory. That's Isaiah 66, 19. And they're the ones that overthrow Gorbachev, the Antichrist. And that's how Christ will defeat the Antichrist, through the Russians. Through the Russians. And now you see why Christ needed the Jews to reject him. So they would go into a long exile, and then when they come back, there'd be a series of wars, and then he would show up, and he would defeat the whole world. And that's what he's doing. He's defeating the Antichrist, who owns the world by that time, because Russia will wage war against America and defeat America, because America disarms after Gorbachev makes peace. And so when Gorbachev launches war against America, America will be defeated because we don't have the arsenal. Anyway, long story short, Christ needed the Jews to reject him so that the new inhabitants would reject the Jews when they came back from the exile. There would be the war, and then Christ would come, and he would show who was invincible. It's not the Antichrist, even though the Antichrist has all the weapons. He's got the tanks, he's got the nuclear bombs, he's got the missiles, he's got everything. All Christ has is a light that he gives off, like in Acts chapter 9, verse 3. And with that light is enough. So the irony is that Christ has nothing but light, and yet he defeats the Gorbachev, which is like Goliath, because Goliath, his name starts off with G-O, and Gorbachev, his name starts off with G-O also. And so if you have any comments, put them in the comments section. Also, look up the caption under the video, the comments that I write, because I'm going to try to give the transcript. I'm going to try to write down most of what I say. I'm going to put it in written form so you can make a copy of it and put it on paper, so that if EMP occurs, you know, it will occur in America. Now, if you're watching this from some other country, like say Africa or India, you won't have to worry about EMP, electromagnetic pulse. But for the people that do have to worry about EMP, the grid will go down. There won't be no computers. You have to get everything on paper. Okay, look up my leave any comments on my Gmail, joegrace@gmail.com, JoeGrace@gmail.com.